to order. I know that Lewis and John will be running in here. I know they're in a meeting right now. I hope you did hear that Jim Wood's father-in-law passed away, and as such, they're in Florida for the burial as we speak. And I hope you saw a note from Ben Davenport. He's in Charlotte investigating light rail. And so we'll go ahead and get started with the presentations. The first one will be the Pendleton Child Service Center. Lyndon, how are you?
Doing pretty good, thank you.
Good.
So good afternoon, Mayor Sessions and members of the City Council. Thank you for having me here this afternoon to brief you on a very important topic regarding the Pendleton Child Services Center. Hopefully with this briefing, that'll bring it to closure our part related to the investigation. A couple of things before I get started. First of all, I did want to recognize a couple people. Most of you know Sharon Hayes, my forensic audit manager. She led this investigation, and so I certainly wanted to recognize her. And also with me today, we have two audit interns. I know within the city, we promote partnering with our universities throughout the Commonwealth. We have Jonathan Lance from Regent University, and we have Alexander Nichols. Okay, I'm sorry, Alex. They just started last week, so I'm still getting the last names, from James Madison University.
All right.
So we both.
We welcome all of you. Glad to have you here.
Okay. And also, everybody does have a copy of the report in front of them. It was in your council packet, but if you did not bring it with you, I did put a copy not only of our report, but the response from Danette Smith, the Human Services Director. And just to give everybody a heads up, this report was requested by the press, and we did consult with Rod Ingram. And since it is being discussed in an open session, and it is going to be provided to you, he did advise us that we could provide that to them. So I just wanted to make you aware of that as well. Okay, so basically what I wanted to do here was go over the summary. A detailed report was provided to Human Services. That report will not be released because there is an ongoing investigation, which we will get into. But this is the summary of the key points, okay? So basically, we have the Pendleton Child Services Center, and everybody knew it was a short-term, multidisciplinary, family-oriented community service program that was just right down the street. Housed within the Pendleton Child Services Center was the Comprehensive Services Act program, which was a separate, distinctive program that just happened to be housed at the Pendleton Child Services Center. So we didn't want to get the definition of those two entities confused. Okay? In regarding the major issues related to the Pendleton Child Services Center, number one, we did validate that there were violations of the Virginia Public Procurement Act and city procurement policies. As a result of many of the procurement policies being ignored and circumvented, many of the contracts did not make its way to the procurement office and/or the city attorney's office. So as a result, we had many payments to vendors without signed and approved contracts. We did identify violations of the State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act. We identified several companies directly owned by Pendleton Child Service Center employees that were awarded city contracts to provide services directly for the center. We noted that were allegations of abuse that were not properly and/or timely reported to the proper officials. the Department of Human Services has a continuous quality improvement division where any allegations of accidents or incidents should be reported in accordance to their guidelines. We identified instances where official documents and medical records were falsified. We identified where the center were charging unauthorized fees for clients that were being provided services. And some of those fees were supervised visitation fees, therapeutic assessment fees, as well as parental capacity fees. We noted that charitable donations where the center partnered with local businesses and individuals, and they collected charitable donations on behalf of the center and the center sponsored programs that could not be accounted for. We identified cash on hand, literally in drawers and cabinets that the sources could not be readily determined. We noted instances of nepotism. We talk about the administrator hiring her nephew as a teacher, and the teacher was an unlicensed teacher, and the same individual was also hired to perform utilization reviews. And then from the CSA side, we noted at one time the CSA coordinator's son, daughter, brother, and nephew were all employed at the center. Okay. I mentioned the use of an uncertified and unlicensed teacher. We determined there was case management conducted by unqualified employees. Okay. And then because of the fact that the CSA program and Pendleton Child Services Center were physically housed under the same facility, there was a relationship that was fostered that allowed the mismanagement of CSA funds, the redirection of CSA funds to the Pendleton Child Service Center. And basically, the Pendleton Child Service Center relied heavily on those funds that were being misdirected. We also noted that the PCSC Management Board, the board responsible for providing oversight and direction over the Child Services Center, was basically dissolved without the proper city council notification or approval. Okay, so wrapping up the issues related with Pendleton Child Services Center, we noted a couple instances. Obviously, we have children that are provided services over there. We had 2 employees that did not pass a background check that were still hired, and one of them actually had in their files, the applicant does not meet the criteria to have responsibility for safety and well-being of children, yet the individual was still hired. Okay. Then we had many instances of payments to unauthorized contracted workers. So basically, they weren't employees. They weren't employees that were hired through our authorized temp agencies, but they were workers, vendors acting as workers. So they had more of a vendor-type relationship. Those were the Pendleton Child Service Center issues. We're going to move on to the Comprehensive Services Act program-related issues. As I mentioned, because of the facilities, both of the 2 programs were housed under the same facility, they were basically intertwined. 20 years of that relationship developed and fostered into many issues. And the Pendleton Child Service Center was actually a recipient of the CSA funding, and in fiscal year 14, they received over $847,000 and for fiscal year 15, they received over $909,000 of CSA money. So as you can see, they heavily relied on the CSA funding for their continued operations. The second issue we noted were utilizations reviewed were improperly administered. Obviously, to receive services from the CSA program, utilization reviews had to be performed. So we did note that, number one, they weren't being performed by those individuals with the experience. One was a teacher on the Pendleton side, okay? So they were not performed in accordance with state guidelines. We had utilization reviews performed by unqualified employees. And then we did have issues where billings for the utilization reviews were not supported by the necessary related documentation. Okay. We noted instances of incorrect payments to vendors. Okay, we had one vendor that submitted 43% of his invoices didn't have the proper mileage reimbursement, and that was a vendor that was providing transportation. So that was the key support for his invoice. And then we had 8% of the invoices had some type of error, and most of those errors were minor in nature, okay, but they were still errors. The board that was overseeing the CSA side was the CPMT, the Community Policy and Management Team. And basically, their responsibility was to provide oversight and management to CSA. We did identify that they weren't properly operating as intended, and that is a board that is appointed by council. And so I know we're in the process of reconstituting the board to ensure that they are, in fact, fulfilling the responsibilities and the oversight. But a lot of the responsibility was, once again, taken over by the CSA administrator and coordinator. Okay. All right, and a few more things. We did note that there was, in fact, an audit done by the State Office of Comprehensive Services. And so we just made a note, per the city code, any type of audit by any state, federal, or third party that is doing any type of audit within the city, the departments are required to notify my office. That way we could either leverage on any work they perform or provide input and assistance to them on either findings or helping develop a management response. We were not made aware that this audit was performed until we got into our investigation. Okay? So now I just want to talk about some actions taken to date. We have had 4 individuals resign: the administrator for Pendleton Child Services Center, the coordinator for the Comprehensive Services Act. So the 2 ultimate leaders of the 2 programs, they both have resigned. The teacher resigned, and we also had a behavior specialist resign. Management made a decision, which council was informed of, to actually close the center. So the center is closed effective March 13th, 2015. The 12 employees there were transferred to other positions. 5 additional employees resigned to seek opportunities outside the city. The CSA program that was housed there was physically moved to the Human Services Administration building, and currently the center is vacant, awaiting repurposing. So Barry Shockley is working with the respective departments involved to repurpose that building. Several issues that were referred to the police department, And so there is an investigation from the criminal side that the police have now taken over. So we are not involved with that investigation, aside from providing them the documentation and support they need from our records. So that related to any potential fraudulent billings and payments utilizing the CSA funds, missing charitable donations, and potential violations of the Conflict of Interest Act. Okay? And that is, we are working with the Economic Crimes Unit of the Police Department. Okay? Some issues that have been referred to the city's office for further review were the issues related to the Virginia Public Procurement Act and the violations of the State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act. Okay? State city agencies notified in coordination with Danette Smith, the Director of Human Services, and Sharon Hayes from my office, have been the Department of Behavioral Health and Development Services, the Office of Comprehensive Services, the Department of Education, the City of Chesapeake Department of Social Services, because we did have a contract with them at the center, the City of Virginia Beach Public Schools, because some of their students were impacted with the closure, City of Chesapeake Public Schools, and the Virginia Beach Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court. In our detailed report, we had over 40 recommendations to strengthen internal controls and operating procedures and ensure the compliance with city, state, and federal regulations. For brevity purposes, those were not included in here, but basically they ran the gamut of taking the necessary disciplinary action to implementing the various controls. I did want to, before closing, recognize that we did have the full support of Danette Smith, the Director of Human Services, and not only from her, but her staff as well as Cindy Curtis has provided us full cooperation. So we've worked collaboratively to identify the issues, correct the issues, and more importantly, where do we go forward to move forward, okay? So that concludes the summary of our findings, and if you have any questions, we're glad to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Louis.
And going back to the beginning,
Yes.
did this operation ever have an operation manual?
I believe so, that they were operating under certain guidelines. I'm sure a lot of those guidelines weren't formalized or disseminated. You know, obviously they're working towards that now, but we did see pieces of policies and procedures that were out there, but they weren't always followed or weren't always disseminated to the proper folks.
But it was a designated separate operation, wasn't it?
The two, yes, between Pendleton and CSA?
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
And it didn't have an operations manual.
There was an operating manual that
You want to step up here?
There was an operating manual that they had been completed in-house, but it had not been formally authorized. It had not been reviewed by the department. It had not been reviewed by the city attorney. There was an administrative directive in there that had not followed the policy of being signed off by the city manager, nor the department, nor the city attorney's office. So they had a manual, but it had not been an approved manual, as well as it was noted when the CSA office came down that they did not have a proper manual that they were supposed to be following. And that was for the CSA side. There's a distinct difference here. There are two issues here. There is the Pendleton side, and then there's the CSA side. They should have been operating as separate divisions, but they were not. And so therefore, the CSA manual had not been formally approved. There were some policies and procedures that the Pendleton side of the house had to follow, there were some DHS, formal policies and city policies that they were supposed to be following.
It just blows my mind, really. I mean, almost any business operation is required, really, to have an operations manual in order to establish policy and procedures.
Yeah, and that just gets back to the lack of the oversight. And that was just one component that was obvious evidence that the lack of the oversight was not there.
And who was responsible for getting that manual, so-called whatever they had? Who was responsible for
administrator.
getting that approved?
It would have been the administrator. It was the administrator and the coordinator for CSA who were one and the same. Okay, actually, the Pendleton administrator and the CSA administrator was one and the same person. It would have been their responsibility to forward that to their management team, which would have been a deputy director at the particular time that was assigned that, and then that deputy director would have forwarded that to Ms. Smith or her predecessor, actually, her previous predecessors, the previous directors of the Department of Human Services, and that did not happen.
And it was never reviewed by the city attorney.
Never.
Jana?
I guess I'm piggybacking on Lewis's question. How did we get this far? I mean, you just said lack of oversight, but these are pages of errors and things that are wrong in kids' lives. And how did we get here without there being some review by someone? I don't understand where that breakdown is. Why?
Well, actually, there were reviews. There were state reviews. There was a review by the Department of Behavior and Development, Mental Health. And there was reviews by the Department of Education, which I talked with them and I expressed that. Now, also please remember that the Department of Behavior Services, they were actually giving us good reviews. And upon asking them that, I asked the particular person, because it was the same person all the time, I asked them the scope of their review, and they also admitted to me that maybe their scope of review did not cover what it should have. That's why in the actual report I did, put that. I also talked to the Department of Education and asked them their scope of their review. They sort of declined to say anything to us. So they were actually leading the department and letting the department know. The only instant where there was an inkling of a problem was when the CSA came down, and CSA did an audit. And so at that time, once again, the administrator did what they normally did. They just took over everything, and they kept informing the staff and kept trying to tell the director what was found in that particular audit was incorrect. And that's why my boss said if they had called us in, what we would have done is coordinated and actually looked at their findings, and then we would have said, wait a minute, okay? Because that's what we do. So they were being told, they were being directed, but they were being misdirected.
Yeah, I think the scope and level of the reviews that were being done by other agencies didn't necessarily delve as deep as we got into some of the issues.
Well, two things in regards to that. One, hiring people that have FBI background checks that say does not meet for the safety of children. Is this a rogue separate organization, or should they not go through our HR department that should have been caught? I mean, if it says do not hire and we hire them anyway, someone's stroking them a paycheck, it seems that there's a checks and balance there that should have been caught. And then two, those state auditors that are coming down and saying, okay, you guys are doing a great job, I'm hoping someone at the state has lost their job as well, as opposed to just the people here in Virginia Beach taking the brunt of that?
Background check first.
Well, the background checks, apparently they were operating on their own. Now, Human Services has their own HR division, and that HR division was operating, and they did question some of these background checks and did inform them, wait a minute, what are you doing? The administrator overrode that, okay, and went on and hired anyway. And she had what was called, we call them the pink folders. And she set those pink folders aside. And then what she did, she actually had payments. They actually came, they were acting as vendors, as Mr. Vermeer said, and they would actually come over to accounts payable to get a check cut.
So a lot of the controls that were in place were just overridden, circumvented, overridden. And when that's occurring at the top, is really, I mean, we can have internal controls in place, but we all know when the breakdown occurs at the top, there's not much that can prevent it.
John Moss?
Couple of things. First of all, I hope we have a follow-on executive discussion on this topic, because I think it warrants it for other reasons than we can discuss here. I think there's some personnel issues that go from the time we discussed this initially in executive session to today that need to be addressed, and I would like to have that opportunity to do that. But moving on, in this thing, it talks about employees, because it seems, I want to make sure I understand correctly, especially in light of following up on Ms. Shannon's comments. The 2 employees that did not pass the background check, were those employees that got checks signed by John Atkinson, treasurer of the city of Virginia Beach, or electronic payments authorized by the city as employees for which we withheld taxes and everything else, and they were truly employees?
They were contract employees, not in the normal sense of contract employee, but as Mr. Remia says, they were acting as vendor employees, and they got checks directly issued through a procurement invoice. They would put an invoice in over at Pendleton. They would submit it over to finance.
So the question, the answer to your question is no, they were not.
Okay, I think that's important here, because if that were true, and there's a vendor, the background check becomes immaterial unless we're checking the vendor and there was something going on there. Because this would lead you to believe, by the way this is stated, that the employees, in fact, were city employees.
Yeah, because contract employees are in fact required to go through background checks as well.
So we were getting invoices like for time and labor things that we could check, like they were
Yes,
time and labor contracts?
yeah.
Okay, so then I'm like, well, we can deal with that probably in the executive session better than that. Now, next thing I'd like to deal with is this audit that took place by the state. Does the state, before it conducts an audit, I mean, I get audited by the Naval Audit Service, other places, they always
Yes.
send a letter to the command or the city. Was there a letter from the Commonwealth, from the appropriate cabinet office, notifying the city on stationery that said, we're going to be here conducting, and that went to some place other than this office?
Usually every audit that occurs, whoever's in, the respective department that is involved, they will be notified. The actual notification letter for this, I cannot speak to whether it went straight to the administrator, if it actually went to the department. I'm not sure if you're aware.
Copy of that, I'd like to have a copy of that, out of the state auditor,
The actual-
who they
the actual-
notified, because that means if it was outside of that department, maybe we didn't keep track, but someone had noticed that something was happening there. I'd like to know who was first notified and how they were notified that that audit was taking place. And then if that came to the...
We'll have to dig and we'll probably find that out. We actually have the report but we can find out who is the point of contact that they initially, I would suspect that if they were working directly with the administrator, it probably went to that individual as the point of contact. But we can get that information for you.
And is this report available?
We can sit down, because of the fact that some of the issues have been forwarded to the police department. We have not released the full report.
How about the state report? The state.
Oh, no,
audit?
you mean the state report? Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to.
The state report, as a matter of fact, is on the state's website, but we can make sure you get a copy of this actual report.
And when the report is published, is there a distribution letter or notification letter that goes out, since it's publicly made available, whereby people are notified that in fact the report is completed and
I will
available
look
for
at, I'm
public?
sure on the CC in their cover letter, it'll show the
I'd like
distribution
to have
list.
that as well, please.
Okay,
That would be
but we do
great.
actually have the report because they make that available to the public.
I just want to applaud us, and especially you, for the work that you've done to share as much as you can with the public. And I share Lewis's view about it's just hard to believe that there wasn't a manual, and we got this far along before. I applaud the person who saw it and brought it to our attention, but clearly why it took so long. But like I said, I would like to discuss those personnel issues in executive session at a later date, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Amelia?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask two things about the auditors that came in.
Yes.
How familiar were they with the administrator?
The one particular order from the Behavior Department was quite familiar with the administrator. I asked that question myself. In actuality, the administrator was the only one that would ever deal with that particular auditor when they came in.
Because, familiarity can breed complacency.
Yes.
So I wondered about that. And then to do with the manual in that aspect, there was a board, right?
That is correct. There was a board over,
Did not notice that. Never got a chance to look at the manual or ask for it?
It was never disseminated. It never became an issue until CSA came in and did their particular audit.
yeah, I'm not sure if that would be something the board would seek or request unless they knew, it was out there being routed for approval and they they would have asked, can we look at it just to be familiar with what's in there. But I'm not sure that they even had knowledge that it was out there to request the document.
Can I comment just briefly on this manual question? The issue, I think the question that the Vice Mayor was asking was focused more on a manual for this particular operation for this division. And I think your answers were directed that way. There's everything from the state procurement law to all of the city's administrative directives and things that guide the employees in terms of how they're supposed to operate that were just not being followed. So,
But were they put together in a compact way that the administrator would have that and be able to refer to that to know or not know whether or not they were complying with the law and the
Yeah.
policies of the city and the state?
in terms of the city's directives, the
Absolutely.
answer is yes.
Yeah, and quite frank, I don't think it was an issue that they didn't have direction on what to do and, send a contract to procurement and the city attorney's. I think a lot of that was just simply being chosen to be overridden,
Ignored.
circumvented, and ignored.
Shannon, then we'll wind up.
The CSA audit, are they done automatically every year, 2 years, or was that something that there was a red flag that they're like, we need to do an audit?
No, actually, that particular time, it's not done every year. At that particular time, they were actually doing all the entities in Virginia. And so that, I
We were
believe that
cycled.
was the first.
We were included.
That was the first time. And actually, Virginia Beach was one of the first audits that they conducted.
All right, well, we thank you very much for the information. My biggest frustration, there's a lot of frustration, but I always thought the Nelson project was a really good project. I mean, I know at first it had great
Yes.
reports. I guess it just hurts twice as bad thinking that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of others in the community that felt the same way and very disappointed, so.
Could I just ask a quick question? Can you give us just an indication, I know there was a mention there about the remedies, sometimes through adversity you find opportunity, and obviously, I know, what remedies are gonna be in place to prevent this, not only in other entities, whether it be Health and Human Services or other areas in the city? How do you feel comfortable about the actions to date?
Yeah, well, obviously, Danette Smith as the director has, taken the task, to heart, and we have seen a lot of the recommendations that we recommended have already been implemented. You know, there's short-term recommendations. There's obviously going to be some long-term recommendations, but I think she's assembled the team, the right people, and, you know, I think we all learned that you need the proper oversight at every level. But from the plan, the action plan that we have seen to date, I think we are going to address, you know, all of the issues. And a responsibility that we have is every recommendation that we have made, we will continue to follow up to ensure corrective action has in fact taken place to address each of the respective issues we identified.
Thank you.
We need to applaud you for taking that step, immediate action. I think that's important.
Yes.
Like you said. Thank you, Ms. Smith.
All righty, well, we thank
Thank
you.
you. All right.
Let's go to City Manager's briefing, State of Virginia Beach Families. Andy Friedman, we welcome you, sir.
This first one is really just for information. We've had a lot of conversation at the council level at the last retreat in February, for example, in terms of the economy and the impact on our families. And it's directly driving some of the things that we're going to talk about in upcoming months in terms of housing and the need for certain kinds of housing and so on. So Andy had pulled this together as part of the work that they are doing in one of our strategic issue teams and made the presentation to our department leadership team, and we just thought that there was some really good information in there that council would appreciate having as well.
Well, Andy, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Presumably.
I'm just there is a lot of information here, and this presentation will be posted or may already be posted for your review. So I'm going to, with your permission, kind of speed through a little bit. And the first, we're going to cover demographics, some basic information, economic, housing, transportation, education, health, crime. And let me just say that I'm not the expert in all of these subjects. I'm the presenter. This information was put together by groups of people who are experts from management services, from the health department, from the police department. But we wanted to put in one place information that covered a broad range of issues in Virginia Beach. When we talk about family in this report, household and family are the same. We're not distinguishing that. And most of the data in here, but not all of it, is from the American Community Survey by the Census Bureau. So that means there are year-to-year variations because it is a statistical survey. It's a sample survey. So you can't judge one year to the other unless you see a consistent trend. Basic information, how many people live here, how many households are there? About 448,000 people live here. The Census Bureau estimates about 177,000 housing units, about 106,000 owner-occupied, about 57,000 renter-occupied. The Real Estate Assessors Report, which is an actual count rather than an estimate, says we have 173,000 housing units. 140,000 of those are non-multifamily, that is, they're condos or single-family, and then the rest are 32,000 multifamily units in apartment buildings. Our household growth in the last 10 years has been steady but slow. We've added about 12,000 households in the last 10 years, an average of about 1,200 a year. Our occupancy in Virginia Beach, about 60% of our households are owner-occupied, about 32% are renter-occupied, and based on the Census Bureau, about 8% are vacant. We always think they've overestimated the vacant units, but that's what they have in their report. The percentage of renters in Virginia Beach is increasing as it is nationwide. People, after the recession, stopped buying houses at the rate that they were buying, and so the home ownership rate is down near 60%. The renter rate is between 30 and 40%. As many of you know, Virginia Beach was the fastest growing city in the country in the 1980s, but that is not true. If you look at this chart goes from 1950 to 2013, and the last part of it shows kind of slow and steady population growth. We're adding about 4,000 people a year right now. we've had an average number of persons per household stay the same, about 2.6 for the last 10 years. So this is a complex graph, but it shows the types of households who live here. The bottom bar, or kind of pinkish, shows the married couple family households, and those have slightly declined from about 52% in 2005 to about 48% now. The black bar has stayed basically the same. Those are male householders, family household, but just a single male. The red bar is the female householder. It's a single parent household, and the white bar are unrelated households. And those have just changed a little bit from about 30 to 32, so it's not a big trend. It's relatively stable household composition, except you can probably say that married couple families have declined slightly. This is a very interesting chart. The four big groups of bars are age groups, and the colored are the years. So this is the 0 to 19 age group. From 2005 to 2012, the number of people who, the percent of people who are in that age group have declined. 20 to 44, relatively flat. 45 to 64, up a bit, and 65 and older on a continuous increase, although still only about 11% or 12% of the total population. So we all say the city's getting older, but it's still not a huge portion of the total population. This is households with children. Percentage of the population declined since 2005 from about 39 to about 34%. So a slight but kind of steady decline. That's what you expect if you see more older people. Householders living alone, not much of a change. There's about 39,000, about 1/4 of the population is people living alone. The race of households has been relatively stable. This is the blue bar is white households, 70% in 2008, 68% in 2012. African American, very stable. The yellow is Asian. It's gone up somewhat from 5.7 to 6.5, and all others have gone up from 5 to 6. So we have some growth. The Asian population is growing the fastest, but it's still only 26,000, approximately 26,000 people in the population. Hispanic population is the blue bar at the bottom. Slight change from 2008 to 5.9 to 7.2. Again, because this is sample data based on the census, it looks like it's a steady growth, though. It looks like a slight growth in the Hispanic population. This is the percent of the population foreign-born. In 2005, it was 7.5%. 2012, it's 8.8%. So you could pretty much say about 1 in 11 of our residents, 9%, were born outside the United States. This is another complicated graph, but it's very interesting. This is where people were living a year ago. The orange-colored bar is people who didn't move in the last year. The red bar is people who just moved in Virginia Beach. So all those are stable. That's 91% of the people were in the same place last year. But the white bar is people who lived in a different city in Virginia. The yellow bar is people who lived in a different state. And the very tiny bar at the top is people who lived outside the U.S. If we add those last three together, it's about 8% of the people in any given year were not here the year before. If you take that over 3 years, that's 25% of the people here didn't live here 3 years ago. So that's a pretty large change in the population when you think about it over 3 years' time. And it tells us that we need to have a lot of information programs because people may not know enough about Virginia Beach if they just arrived in the last 1, 2, or 3 years. A little bit of economics. This one is my weak spot. Catherine Weissel put this on here and is not here to explain it. Median household income was $58,000 in 2005, and it says $61,000 in 2012, so a slight uptick. but I'm not here to be able to interpret those huge variations for you. As I said, it's a sample survey. This is average monthly SNAP or food stamp recipients. You can see the huge jump in 2009 and continuing. There are two things that we understand that to be caused by: a change in policy and eligibility, as well as the recession. This is a map showing census tracts where the median household income is lower than the number I showed you for 2012. That's just trying to start at understanding where people live. We don't draw any big conclusions from this. This is really just trying to lay out some basic facts for everyone. Some housing information. Housing is certainly the area that I know the most about, and one of the really neat things about housing is it doesn't move, and most of it just stays there for a very long time, so it's easy to predict what happens. Our blue bar is single-family houses. We have almost 100,000 single-family detached houses. The red bar is townhomes. We have in the neighborhood of 30,000 of those. The white bar is condominiums. The little green bar is duplexes or homes with apartments. And the yellow are apartment units, and we have about 32,000 apartment units. However, the growth in housing has not been in the single-family vein. Since 2008, we added 4,000 apartments, 3,400 condominiums, and only 1,700 single-family houses. So we all know that there's not a lot of green space for new single-family development, and this is reflecting that. Age of housing stock, this is directly from the real estate assessor's office. 33% of our housing is 20 to 29 years old. 10%, only 10% of it has been built in the last 10 years. So this is where we are today. And then because housing doesn't move and very little of it is destroyed or demolished, we can very easily, and if we take current growth rates of about 1,700 housing units per year, we can project where it will be in 2040. And this is what it looks like if current growth rates stay the same. 60% of our housing will be older than 50 years because all the current housing is going to age by 25 years between now and 2040. And most of the newer housing will be a much smaller portion of it, will be 40% of our housing. 50 years, as we all know, is a pretty important age for housing, needs a lot of redo at that age. So that's one of the implications, one of the things we have to understand as we try to look towards 2040. Renters in Virginia Beach and in the United States are facing significant rent burdens. The red slice of the pie is 22,000 of our renter households who pay more than 35% of their income towards rent. And the blue slice of the pie is 6,700 households who pay between 30 and 34% of their income for rent. That's according to HUD, more than 30% you're rent burdened, you're having to cut back on some other expenses or you're financially unstable. I'm going to skip that one because this shows it better. Almost all of the low-income renter households in Virginia Beach are paying huge amounts, more than 30% of their income for rent. This bar shows that over 90% of households earning less than $20,000 paying more than 30%. This bar shows that over 90% of the households making between $20,000 and $35,000 are paying more than 30% of their income for rent. So there's a significant number of people, current residents, not homeless, but financially stressed by the rent they're paying. This is a chart that shows the relationship between median renter costs and incomes for low-income renters. It's kind of another way of looking at what I just showed you. The blue line is median income for people at 30% of the HUD median income. And that took a big dive in the recession and has not gone back up to where it was in 2008. This is 2008 to 2013. But rents never took a dive and, in fact, have continued to climb as there's a greater demand for renter housing. So it's another way of showing what I just showed you, that people with low incomes are having a difficult time affording rental housing.
You said HUD median income. Does HUD have its own prescribed definition of what median income is?
Yes, sir. They establish an area regional median income.
It's not just City of Virginia Beach.
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure people knew the difference, that that's not City of Virginia Beach.
That's true.
specific.
Yep.
Thank you.
And so this, again, I'm not the education expert in the room, but these were gathered from the school system by management services as kind of general indicators. The most important predictor of high school graduation and career success is reading proficiency by the 3rd grade. In the United States, 68% of children miss that goal. 80% of children from low-income families miss that goal. We're doing way better, but still 25% of our 3rd graders do not read at grade level, so there's still some progress to be made. The percentage of economically disadvantaged children in the school system has taken a slow increase from 2007 to 2012. It was about 26%, and now it's about in the neighborhood of 34%. Yes, sir.
Definition of that still 150% of the urban family of 4, or what's the current definition?
I'll have to check for you.
Is that in the report when we get it? Will that be in the report?
I will make sure that it is. This is the percent of children entering kindergarten needing reading remediation. It's taken a nice, long, and continuous decrease, so only 9% of children entering kindergarten need reading remediation. That should also help with the 3rd grade reading success as that goes down.
What's
Go
the
ahead.
reason of the success for this? What do you?
That I would not be able to talk about. That would be
We've had a great ready-to-learn program for a long time
In the Brooks.
in the beach, and they've really been working on it.
That's true. Hopefully that's right.
It's a lot with the libraries and all.
That's gonna make a huge difference down the road for a lot of young people.
Here's a graph of several of them you're going to see where it looks like an anomaly in the last year where they changed the test. This is SOL passage rates for Virginia Beach. English reading has been consistently, these are 3rd, 7th, and 12th grade SOL passings. They're all consistently above in the 87% and above. Then they changed the test. Yes, sir.
Jim, I think we ought to feed back to the state. Usually when you see a change in baseline, they'll have some kind of a notation, a break in the chart, and they'll have a footnote saying re-baseline, because people see that. And
Right.
there is a standard professional nomenclature for charting for that, and they ought to update that to reflect that.
Yeah, that's not a true picture of what's happening. So we have the same thing that SOL in science. Again, this is 12th grade, 7th grade, and 3rd grade. Our 3rd grade, 7th grade's doing the best. They all went down a little bit when they changed the test. And this is math passage rates. The same thing is happening. But generally, you can see we are above 70% for all the groups and above 90% in 3rd grade.
Do we know if, at the state level, if all, as an average, when the SOLs changed, all of the state averages fell, or just, or?
Yeah, it was,
Okay.
Right.
Went to a lot more word problems and less multiple choice in that part of it.
This is another complicated chart. It shows the educational attainment of our residents. The bottom one is someone who's not graduated from high school. 6.9% in 2012 of our residents did not graduate from high school. 50% had high school graduation. About 10% had an associate degree. About 21% had an undergrad degree. And about 11% had a graduate or professional degree. But with 7% of our residents, or actually 7% of our adults not having a high school degree, that would be an area to address. But those numbers have been relatively stable over time, at least for the last 10 years. This is census kind of mapping some of that data. Census tracts where more than that 7% of the population does not have a high school degree. Just trying to show differences in the population. On-time graduation rate has a nice steady increase up to 88% in 2013. dropout rate looks to have a nice decline from 2008 down to 4.9% in 2013. The number of dropouts is at 322 in 2012-13, and our dropout rate is 1%, which is lower than the state's average of 1.26. There's a lot of health information from Dr. Kuhlberg. Infant mortality. So on this chart, Virginia Beach is the orange bar. This is a regional comparison chart. Blue is Chesapeake, red is Norfolk, yellow is Portsmouth, and gray is Suffolk. So Virginia Beach, in most of these bars, is the lowest in the region in infant mortality, except in 2010 and 2011. But in 2012, we're back down at 6 deaths per 1,000 live births. This is a goal that the city has met. It's set a Healthy People 2020, which is a national standard setting thing. So we're very close to meeting that goal of infant mortality reduction. That's just mapping that, and there's so few of those that I'd probably not pay a lot of attention to that graph. Infant mortality by race highlights that this is the red is African American, the orange is the entire city, and the white and the blue is Caucasian. So we have a disparity in infant mortality that this information is from 2003 to 2012. African American infants were 2 to 3 times more likely to die in their first year of life than Caucasians. Low birth weight infants, again, this is a regional comparison with Virginia Beach being orange. We are the lowest in the region, I believe, for each of the last 5 years, so that's a good rate. Low birth weight is a concern because low birth weight is a very high predictor of needing special education programs when you get into school. This is low birth infants by race. Again, a racial disparity where about 14% of African American infants were low birth weight and about 7% of Caucasian infants. This is percent of infants born by education level of mother. Only less than 5% of infants were born to mothers with less than a high school education. So that's a good thing. It's actually a little lower than the population occurrence of people without a high school education. So most of the infants born are to, most of the people born are to people with high school or above educations. Teen births by race, the same racial disparity exists. This shows about an overall rate of down to about 5%. It's declined significantly in the last 10 years from about 8% in 2003 to about 5% in 2012. And all of them are going down, which is a good thing. Adult obesity. So there's obesity and there's overweight. Obesity is the very high overweight, and this has climbed slightly from 2010 to 2014 in Virginia Beach. We are meeting the Healthy People goal of less than 30%, but we're just barely making it because we're at 28%. But when you combine obese and overweight, you see this is the regional comparison. Virginia Beach is at 62%. This is the state at 62%. So we're all kind of in the same boat on obese and overweight. And this is obese and overweight youth in Southampton Roads. Virginia Beach on the right at a combination of 28%. The state also at 28%. Physical inactivity. This is adults not meeting physical activity recommendations within the past 30 days. Half of our adults don't meet the physical activity recommendations within the past 30 days. Youth and alcohol, tobacco use, a regional comparison. This is Virginia Beach, and we are kind of similar to the region, and most of those were not lower than the region. This is adult tobacco, smoking, and alcohol. This is Virginia Beach again. The darker bar is the percentage of adults who smoke, about 17%, and percent of adults age 18 and above at risk for binge drinking, about 20%. We are not the lowest in the region, but we're close. Medically uninsured. This is a regional chart, Virginia Beach again on the right. The blue is 15% of adults between 19 age and 64 are uninsured. About 5% of children, 0 to 18, are uninsured because there are more children's health insurance programs. Dental access, who's been to the dentist in the past year? The youth are the gray chart, Virginia Beach is on the right. We have about 20% of our youth haven't been to the dentist in the past year, and the same number of adults who haven't been to the dentist in the past 2 years. So we get a little more time to get to the dentist. A little bit about crime. You know a lot of this from the police chief, but Virginia Beach's crime rate is back down to where it was in 1964. That's the overall crime rate per 1,000 population, back down to near 20 per 1,000 population. We are also the lowest in the country for cities of similar size. Crimes per 1,000 residents is 28.5 in Virginia Beach. There's only one city close, that's El Paso. We're tied, which I'm surprised by El Paso, but the other cities are way above by a factor of almost 25% higher than these two cities. And then something that I looked at when I looked in detail at the information is violent crimes. Virginia Beach's violent crime rate is less than half of the nearest safe cities, which are Mesa, El Paso, and Raleigh. They're all above 4, and we're at below 2. So we have an incredibly low violent crime rate in Virginia Beach. Juvenile arrests, significantly down in the past 5 years. Juvenile drug and alcohol arrests down by over 37% in the past 5 years. Juveniles arrested for violent crime down by over 50% in the past 5 years. Arrests for domestic assaults, there are 2 bars here. This is aggravated, the small bar, and simple, the blue bar. The aggravated ones are up and the simple ones are down. I don't have the ability to go behind that, but certainly the police department could talk about that. And then economic crimes have increased, and we all know that the economic crimes through the internet are incredibly on the rise, so that's symptomatic here in Virginia Beach as well. And this is economic crimes just for victims over the age of 65. So our goal was not to try to be try to make major conclusions. Some things just stand out very obviously. The age of our average age is increasing. The average age of our housing is increasing. There's no escaping that because of our housing boom in the past. There are a significant number of households financially stressed due to housing costs and or low wages, whichever you'd like to pick. We are pretty well off as our health indicators, but not every single one are we doing the best in the region. There are racial differences in health. Juvenile crime is decreasing significantly. And we're also an extremely safe city in terms of crime. And I would like to thank you all for your attention. We would love to have your suggestions to improve this and help make the information presented clearer and better. I want to thank Catherine Weitzel and her staff who got most of this, Dr. Kuhlberg for the health data, and Captain Gallagher for the crime data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very informative. John?
A couple observations. One, I think this could use a lot more information on the family's financial health side and how much stress they're under. I think this median family income, you did the percentage wise, but I think there's a lot more, as you said, digital data. I would hope that as we move forward, I've mentioned this before, is just knowing degrees is good, but if we can find out and make a differentiation of what's happening with our STEM classified degrees, whether there are other types of, and even certifications. I don't think degrees is always the best indication of your skilled workforce. So I know our schools capturing all the certification our kids are doing, and I think that would be a nice statistics to see because those are real jobs that pay well, and I think we would highlight what we do. And lastly, though I often talk to it, in all those bond prospectus that we issue from time immemorial, it's the same category of jobs, number of people employed, and average wage. So if you could do a trend line on that, constant dollar basis, would give you another indication of where real wage growth is and where it isn't, and where we're growing jobs versus where we think we're growing jobs. And I think that would also be insightful trend information, but I think there's a lot of good news. I'm sure that Warren uses a lot of that, especially crime.
Right.
Is super. And I'm with the mayor relative to education, but that reading level thing is, third grade is a, you know, those things move demographically too, and it's hard to make that up. But that's, and I hope this, I know we talked about that once before when I had a discussion about education, but what their targeted approach to that would be good. At the retreat, I mentioned about the need to have something to give them away the money for everything from vibe to TIF to this to that, but nothing for the average homeowner who pays the bulk of the bill about incentives or how we would do it to renovate housing in our city. And clearly this indicates, when you look at the financial stress that people are under, if we're gonna maintain the housing that we have, which is the cheapest housing to maintain and be affordable, that we're gonna have to take a look at how we address that somehow with tax incentives versus tax expenditures.
Okay, Amelia?
Just a quick question. You mentioned about the renters,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
stress that is continually going up.
Yes, ma'am.
The association realized people are not buying, you know, the single-family homes. Is there any regulation that to encourage them not to keep that upward trend? Is there anything that can be done? I mean, they're already stressed. The rents continue to go high.
Uh-huh.
Do we have anything that can, to talk with that group for
It's a-
leveling it off at a certain point, or it doesn't matter?
I'm not sure I'm,
Well, you're saying that people who are renting,
yes,
they're already stressed, and every year that same rent is going higher and higher.
Correct,
They're only
right.
bringing in so much.
right,
There's going to be a point where they won't be able to even afford rent, and then it ends up being into the homeless situation.
right.
What are we doing to be proactive, to talk with the owners of these rentals or something to, you know, to work on that? Is there anything that can be done?
I think that trend that you saw is a national trend. It's
Okay.
not a city trend. The
Okay,
national
that's
trend
important.
towards more rental, and the demand is driving those rents higher. I think the city has some safety net programs for people who lose the ability to maintain housing.
Right.
But as far as affecting the market rents, I don't think that's something that we can do locally at all.
The market will determine it. John?
Well, the GAO just issued a report, I think late May. It's an assessment of people 45 and over. It's talking about where they are pension-wise and savings and what their long-range disposable income is and the financial pressures. It's a very insightful, especially because you could track it back to the census tract data and see where that's at. But if you're looking forward, and say there's 70 million plus baby boomers, which all will be 65 or older. I think it is by 2030. I think that's right, or 2020, 2025. And the other big segment is millennials, which is just about the same size.
Right.
And so you track that across, you can kind of get a good idea of some larger demographic forces in terms of what they mean.
Right.
But that's a growing segment in our community, because you take that 45 to 55 and say half of that, and you move it over, well, in 10 years, that's 65, and more than likely, given actuarials, most of the 65 people are still with us, hopefully. So that number really moves up.
I'm hoping
It
for
becomes
that.
20% of total population. By 2030, I think it's 20% of all the population will be 65 or older. So that is a huge change, and that's a great report. I just finished reading it the other day.
Good, thank you for that.
Okie dokie, we'll move on now. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much to Pacific Avenue Improvement Project.
This one, Mayor and members of council, really came out of the rack, and Councilmember Ern was there and said that there was really some
I looked at all the pictures over the weekend. They really look good.
interesting information there in terms of the complexity on some of these projects, and this is a good example in terms of what Public Works and our engineering staff goes through. So they're here to kind of, at John's request, really to walk us through this.
Very good. Michael, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Mayor Sessoms, members of council, city manager support. Thank you for your time and opportunity to present this informational briefing really on undergrounding of utilities and the Pacific Avenue project. My name is Mike Tippin. I'm a senior project manager in the City Engineer's Office, Transportation Division. And I've been here for, last month was 2 years, so I don't think I can use the I'm new excuse anymore. So, just to orient yourself, picture of our beloved oceanfront, Atlantic Avenue, Pacific Avenue, Arctic, 17th and 27th, or 22nd. The project went from just south of 17th to just north of 22nd Street. And mostly this presentation is really informational briefing, all photos except for a few text slides, and the rest are just all pictures with a little story to go with it on what it takes to underground these utilities in the oceanfront area. I'll discuss purpose and need real quick, what we did as far as the scope, how we did it, the construction, and where we're going, kind of looking ahead. Purpose and need. Project really supports the revitalization of the Central Beach District as it was identified in the 2008 RASAP plan, or the Resort Strategic Action Plan. And this is the initial phase for the revitalization of Pacific Avenue. What we did, we maintained the existing right-of-way of 60 feet. We haven't relocated all the underground or overhead to underground. We built the infrastructure to do that. New water and sewer lines. The water and sewer were probably installed in the mid-50s or so they have extended their useful life, and it was really time to invest in their replacements. New storm system, new structures throughout, new gas line. The old gas line out there was a 4-inch copper that had been given V&G fits for quite some time. They don't have the equipment and material to connect to that gas line anymore, so that was huge for them. And from a public safety standpoint, big plus to replace that line from copper to the current HDP. And then complete reconstruction of the northbound and southbound lanes, new curb and sidewalk. And then this is just a graphic of a typical block. It shows businesses, residents, all the above ground stuff, curb gutter, but it's the underground stuff that really kind of goes unnoticed. And that's what Pacific Avenue did, was really replace all that underground infrastructure that you kind of see from gas mains, storm, putting in stuff underground for electric and telephone. And how we did it is now for all the pictures. This picture is before we even started, and this is, you're standing on 19th Street looking north in the middle of traffic, and we were wearing vests, so safety was important to us. And first thing we did after setting up the traffic control, this is called a pecker, and it just basically bangs holes in the 8 inches of concrete there. And after that, the excavator comes up, lifts that concrete up, and just starts peeling it back and dropping it and breaking it into pieces that are a little more manageable. And then our first order of business was to dig these pits. And these pits here are for the Dominion vaults. And these vaults weigh about 34 tons, and the pits are about 20 foot deep, 12 foot wide, and about 20 plus feet in length. So this is a huge excavation to just get these things set. And we would set 2 at a time, and then in between we'd start running these duct banks right here, which these guys are doing. And this is at the intersection of 21st and Pacific. I mean, that is a busy intersection right there. And they're down about 12, 15 feet with this duct bank, completely shored up, and that was the main part of this project. And our duct bank, we're putting that thing as deep as we can, so all of our gravity lines, the storm, the sewer, and then our pressure lines can all run on top, so we're not messing with this thing ever again, hopefully, is the plan.
When did you hit water? You had to hit water.
We were fortunate that we had a lot of clay out there within this area. We did hit water down there, and so we were continuously pumping groundwater out. On average, about 80,000 gallons a month, and there were one month where we had a little over 2 million gallons. We had to hit a sand lens, and we struggled to keep our pits dry. But for the most part, this picture here, you see all the clay down at 15, almost 20 feet. That's primarily was all clay. So very little water, and we were very fortunate for that. That was a godsend right there. Just some more of the duct bank being installed at 19th Street, and we worked 7 days a week, sun up to sundown, in all kinds of weather. There were months when guys had 1 day off throughout the whole month, and they were just grinding just to get this project complete within that 7-month window of October 1st to April 30th. And just to give you, this is more of that duct bank, to give you a reference, the duct bank, if you're not familiar, think of a bunch of straws bound together. There were about 14 or 15 of them in this concrete encasement. Each stick is about 20 foot in length, 8 inches in diameter. Like I said, there were about 14 to 15 of these, 12 to 15 foot deep, just being pushed under, all the way through, right there. Then after we finished all that deep excavation, we started coming up within the soil profile, replacing all the water lines. The old water line was cast iron, which if you look at it cross-eyed, it basically shatters. We're replacing it with all ductile iron that's a more malleable or easier to work with, and it doesn't fail as catastrophically, basically, as a ductile. Well, and while we're working, this here is the yellow is a gas line. So we had gas lines in the way. I mean, it was just a spaghetti of utilities out there that we had to contend with on this whole project. That's pretty standard work for what we do when we do these types of projects.
Curiosity, did you find anything that wasn't with the configuration you expected to find based upon the documentation, and was any of it relatively new stuff?
No new stuff that we didn't find like that. Some of the older stuff, pipe sizes were a little bit different. Instead of a 16-inch, maybe it was a 12-inch. Some of the configuration, this particular configuration right here, what was being pulled out was a 12-inch T, and we didn't know that thing was just like that. We did all of our subsurface utility locations, utility potholes, but you don't really know until you open things up. And when we opened up 17th Street in Atlantic, we found a lot of railroad ties and track. We had no idea it was even there. That just kind of puts a little hitch in your giddy up, but we had some line items in there in case we saw that, because we went through some of the older maps and plans, and we knew there was railroad down here. So in case we came across it, we had it in there so we wouldn't get raked over the coals on change orders for those types of things. This here is on the corner of 17th and Pacific, new water line being installed. And what we're trying to do is go underneath the storm system here with the water line, and we still got gas crossing through here, and it's still relatively deep, dirty excavation that just really takes a little bit of time to get into. This is ideal right here. This is the water line, about 3 foot of cover. You can see we had a little bit of sand through here, but then as we got a little bit deeper, it was just all clay after the first 3 to 4 feet, nothing but clay. And as we're excavating, we're putting stuff on the high side and then covering it back in because we just had really good, clean material here to backfill with. This is a hydrant going in. That is the whole hydrant. We only see the top piece, about 2.5 feet of it. The entire assembly is about 6 foot in length, and new gas line that we had to duck under. But just to give you a reference, I mean, it is substantial equipment, that we're putting in and installing there. I was talking about all the new storm systems. We weren't required to add a water treatment system, but we set up this hydrodynamic separator to improve the water quality after we left the project. And what the hydrodynamic separator does, it pulls all the cups, the fines, the grits out of the water before it gets discharged into the Lynn Haven, and then ops will come out through one of these 2 manholes and just suck out all the grit cups that have come in there. And this setup configuration is important in that it's called an offline system. This was the existing line through here. We'll set a manhole with a little weir wall that diverts everything over, and if that thing gets clogged, we can still use this system as it's meant to function. So that's important from a stormwater standpoint, reducing the flooding. And we were talking about the duct bank. That was all electrical. But then there's also the Verizon Cox, Windstream, all the communications. And that's what these conduits are for. They're 6-inch in diameter, and each one of these boxes, the one on the left is for Cox, for the big C, the one on the right is Verizon. We got 10 conduits coming up into the Verizon box. There's ultimately 6 coming into Cox for this particular location. Working with these private utilities, there's months behind the scenes before this project even started to find out what do these guys need, what are their requirements, because this gets turned over for them, for their infrastructure, and then what is a necessity for them versus what is a wish list, and trying to siphon through that, because we're paying for this, and we don't want to pay for this big wish list. And Verizon was one of our biggest challenges. Their wish list was incredible. So we really had to rein them in. And that was months and months of working with these guys behind the scenes before we put a shovel in the ground on this.
Put any capacity in that we could later sell at a later date because it wasn't a necessity that would promote and allow further competition? Do we have capacity to sell?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And then, as I was talking about, we're kind of coming up in our soil profile. These are still the communication conduits, and at all the bends, we had to encase them in concrete because that's where all of the force, when they start pulling their cable through, comes through those bends. And at the end of the day, you really have what looks like an organized bowl of spaghetti out here with all of this stuff that's just kind of being built up through here. Yeah, this is at the corner near 17th, like 7-Eleven's on your right here, and you're kind of looking south for this. On the flip side of the street, we're setting in a new sewer. So we had multiple crews working in the same area to the point where we had to schedule it and plan it so they're not tripping over one another, but we're still meeting our project deadline of April 30th. And if you get too many crews out there, they're just falling all over one another. Sewer on one side, you can see this little kind of yellow and red. We had crews on a duck bank on the other side. We got gas line crossing through here. I mean, it's just looks like a war zone out there. And this is when we had the entire Pacific Avenue shut down for 2 blocks. So that was a huge benefit for us in order to pull this project off, was shutting things down.
Question, so that's a sewer line?
Yes, sir.
Is it, that's crush and run, correct?
The rock down here? Yes, sir.
The reason on sewer lines where we're not using a sealant clay like at a landfill to prevent later filtration or leakage that might occur that would minimize soil damage later or contamination, is there a reason?
What I understand the question, you're asking if we use soil or
Why
clay?
we didn't think, or why we don't use, like they use these sealant heavy clays that seal, that don't allow water to go, since this is a sewer line. We're always concerned about filtration and leakage and things that happen. Here, this would permit the movement of leakage, because that's a crush run, it's not impervious like a sealant clay. I'm just curious what the industry standard is.
That's a very good question. I've never had that. Industry standard for this type of pipe, the PVC pipe, is to use the crush and run or the rock around it because it supports the pipe, whereas the clay around it might, with the pressure coming on top of the pipe, might cause it to oval out a little bit. And the joints, all the joints, these 20-foot sticks of pipe are sealed, but I don't, from a leakage standpoint, I'm not really sure.
Ductile iron, which stands up more under
Yeah.
stress. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good question. I have never had that one before. So after we finish all of this underground work, we're coming up, we compact everything, we start rough grading the site out right now, and we roll it out for the rough grading. And this section here, what you're looking at, is what's going to ultimately be the whole pavement section. And this is, a day or two later, we roll out the geotech fabric or the geofabric and put the basically crush and run or the 21A on top of that. And then after that, pour the curb, the sidewalk, fine grade the roadway, and that's a critical part to the entire thing is this fine grading, because that's all of a sudden we start laying asphalt on it. Anything we got messed up down there is going to reflect all the way up through. So this fine grading, there were a lot of heated discussions and moments out there from a fine grading standpoint. and I've learned a lot of new words that I never knew existed. So it was pretty interesting. Yeah. And what we're looking at here is they're placing the asphalt. We have in the foreground, a base asphalt, the intermediate mix, and the surface mix. And I think these guys probably had the best job in the entire project, because when mercury was hitting 20, wind chills of 2 degrees, they weren't putting asphalt back then, but it's warm, and so they just had all that warmth sitting right there. And there were plenty of days where the United Methodist Church provided coffee and donuts for a lot of the workers when it was incredibly cold out there, I mean, freezing cold. So that was very, very thankful for them. And this picture is that same day, but looking back, and each one of these trucks holds about 12 yards of asphalt. Each truck, you might get about a little over 30 foot of a pull for the asphalt, and that's on one lane. We have 4 lanes running 2,300 feet. So doing the math, that's a lot of trucks, a lot of gas, a lot of expense just to get the asphalt in there, right there. So it's pretty impressive from a timing and getting everything to pull off and happen the way it should. Kind of almost a finished product here. We had to put the median back in, and then everything striped. And we still have, our poles are still on there on the east side. These are the poles that are going to be removed, and all of the infrastructure on those poles are what we're putting underground and pulling through. So some of the benefits with getting that electric, we no longer have cars, trucks, or nor'easters shorting out power, and we'll have just a much more stable power distribution and all the other utilities, data and comm and phone. But one of the things we can't forget about, we're doing this stuff during the wintertime. This was the month of February, pretty much. And the guys working loved it because they had some time off. Myself and a couple others really freaking out because we still have April 30th sitting here that's not moving when we had to have this road open back up. And we had about a week and a half, 2 weeks of this. That was a little stressful going through this part right here. And then kind of looking forward, this is where we were before we started. This is where we're kind of pretty much at right now. And then at the end, when we're finished, this is where we will be, where we no longer have the overhead poles, basically. Everything's underground. And one of the things, you notice these poles are not quite in the middle of the sidewalk, but they're taking up a lot of that space right there and not having a lot of passage, you know, for strollers and everything else. So that's another important piece with opening up and aesthetically looking at this area. And just a reminder, this is a 3-season project. We completed the first season, which was really the hard, dirty work. And I got to know all of the business owners on a very first-name basis, from Tom Brown through Preston Midget, the cashiers, and everybody else with this project. It was hand in hand with those guys. And give you a sense, to do just the duck bank itself is about $8 million per mile, which breaks down to about $1,500 per foot just to underground the overhead. So as we move forward and think about doing this type of work on other jobs, $1,500 a foot is ballpark of what you'd be looking at to do this. This project, at the end of the day, was $4,000 a foot. So that is a little over a third of the cost just in duck bank undergrounding. A lot of that cost, those vaults, 34 ton, huge. That deep excavation, so there's a lot of cost in those undergrounding. Season 2 will be next winter. Season 3 the winter after. And for season 2, all the private utilities basically are going to start pulling all their cables through all that conduit, reestablishing their services, because everything's overhead right now, and they need to convert it from the overhead service to the underground. And that's Dominion, Verizon, Cox, Windstream. The city, we will not have a contractor out there, but I know I'll be getting the calls from all the people up and down there about one thing or another. So I've met with them. They're very aware of this, and they have my number, my cell number, and they're not afraid to use it. So, and we're anticipating just isolated lane closures. Nothing no shutdowns like we had this season, so the impact's very minor compared to what we went through this winter. And then season 3, the following winter, the span wire signal that's at 19th is going to be replaced with a mast arm. All the power poles on the east side are going to be removed from 17th to 22nd. LED streetlights installed, a more decorative sidewalk, and then most work will be in the sidewalk area, isolated lane closures, and the potential for maybe a northbound or southbound for a block closure, but it won't be anything like we have experienced. And we're not, this last bullet, I'm putting it out there, so in case it does happen, it's not going to be a surprise for any of the business owners down there. And then by the end of season 3, again, this graphic here, from a plan view, it's just, I think it's going to be a very nice, welcome change, and everyone's really going to be happy
Already is.
for that.
John?
Are the lighting and the light poles and the traffic poles, are those Cat 2 or Cat 3? What's the category that they're designed to operate in, or to be sustained in, I should say?
Do not know that question. I do not know that answer right now, but I can find out. And you're talking about from the hurricane winds with
Correct.
I'll find that out and let you know.
John Erd?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the council allowing this presentation to go on today, but Mike did such a nice job with the presenting to the RAC, and I know everybody at this table gets the calls that I do, and that is, God, how can a road project cost that much, and why is it taking so long? And I think that, you know, this particularly being a very small project, linear project, really gives a sense to the public of how complex these projects really are, and helps to answer those two questions. I'd also like to take the time to thank Mike and his entire team. In every meeting and every conversation I've had with any of the property owners in this area, they have has nothing but glowing things to say about the contractor and about the city staff, and the way that they were treated in a project that, quite frankly, was disruptive at times to a lot of these businesses. But every one of those businesses that I've had contact with says that they were treated fairly, and that we were very responsive, and made it as painless as possible. So I'd like to thank you.
On behalf of the council, I speak for the entire council, thanking you. I will back up John. I think y'all really tried to accommodate when you could. Sometimes you couldn't, but you certainly did try. And I would tell you, getting that road open for college weekend, if I recall, you got it done.
Yes, sir.
I called Dave Hanson. I said, you got it done, and it was done.
Under budget and ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
That's-
So we
that's
thank
good
you for the
news
great
story.
job. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Great job.
Okay, Mr. Hanson,
Yes, sir.
we're going to be out of here at 6, aren't we?
You bet, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Right, Mr. Jones? We're glad to have you on SIPSA.
Just a brief intro. We've been spending a lot of time working with SIPSA, and as you all know, and very much aware, the cost consequences of dealing with solid waste today are enormous. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here, and we're trying to push for a very sensible, cost-effective regional solution. And John Barnes, who's a great staff member and board member at SIPSA, is working with Dave and Phil and his crew, and I'm working with the other managers, and we're trying to get this done later this summer, if not early fall. But we thought we ought to give you a progress report in terms of where we're at.
Dave, John, Phil, glad to have you.
Mayor, members of council, as Jim said, over the next 3 months, the SIPSA board is going to be wrestling with their assessments, their negotiations, and recommendations. And so the manager called me up Wednesday and said, hey, you need to put this into PowerPoint so we can at least have a conversation with the city council. So appreciate the opportunity to present these, and I apologize for not having it in your Friday packet because I know you guys would have looked at it. So I'll walk you through this. I think one of the things we got to start with is who is actually making these decisions and who represents us on our on the SIPSA board. And you can see that there are 8 jurisdictions that belong to the Southeastern Public Service Authority. And you'll notice down on the bottom line, V for Virginia Beach, Mr. Bill Sorrentino is our government appointed. Bill was technical services engineer and deputy Corps of Engineer Commander during my regime and stayed there for 3 other Corps of Engineer Commanders. And when an opportunity for us to appoint someone, I asked Bill if he was willing to do that. The manager backed that, and the governor appointed him to take that position. Bill sends his regrets. He is in Philadelphia today and cannot join us. Our other member and most important member is, of course, is John Barnes. He is our waste administrator. He is the only sitting board member on the SIPSA that has the technical expertise to actually be able to engage with Bucky and his staff, because John's staff does the same thing. John has 3-4 times the labor force and comparable budget, and also runs a landfill. So he is an extremely important technical asset to the board in the communications and discussions that goes on there. Just a little background for the city council, because we have a couple new council members, but we brought before you in the 2012 a series of briefings that talked about disposal alternatives, and we gave an update by the end of 12 so that you understood what was going on with analysis of waste to energy, of what landfilling presented, and some of those discussions. And we had SES engineers that were able to provide an independent study and give us some good recommendations. Then in 13, it was getting heated inside the SIPSA organization to start to pull our thoughts together, and you, the city council, passed a resolution committing to remaining a regional participant in the regional organization for the disposal of municipal solid waste. The last 2 bullets are the 2 bullets that should be most concerning to the members of City Council and the citizens of Virginia Beach. In December of this year, our ash and residue agreement expires. This is the agreement that allows us to have a discounted cost in the tipping fee per ton of $65. On 1 January of next year, our tipping fee goes from $65 to $125. And you all just had to go through that in the budget, knowing that the general fund is picking up a $5 million tab for the second half of this coming fiscal year. We'll have that in place for a full year after that, and then half a year, because as the last bullet says, the current contract agreements, the use and support agreements, they all expire on the 24th of January 2018. And it's the expectation of all members that all debt is paid, and that the new post-2018 SIPSA era will begin. This is the SIPSA dynamic timeline, and I've been challenged by timelines in my past, and thanks to John having familiarity with it, this is kind of how you read it. It goes like this and then down to there for the use and support agreement process. And then for the negotiations for the disposal methodology, it goes like this and then up to there. So don't try and read it. Just let's focus in on the check marks. Where are we in this? Where are we in the SIPSA timeline? The communities have been in possession of the draft use and support agreements since March. And in your last city manager's update on Friday, you received a cover letter, you received a comment letter from showing Jim Spore's review and consent to our review of that use and support draft. This is the first draft. Those are all being put in the hopper and be reviewed by SIPSA again. And I can tell you, as we're here today, that a total of 5 respondents of the 8 have. 3 big communities have not. Suffolk, Norfolk, and Chesapeake have not responded to that draft. And the closure date was the end of last month. At the same time, the SIPSA board is reviewing proposals associated with disposal methodology. We, the city, do collection. We take it to a transfer station, and at that transfer station, the disposal method of the phase of the process takes place. SIPSA picks it up at the transfer station and takes it currently to the waste to energy plant. What will happen in the future is yet to be decided. So what is in the use support agreement? it was developed by a subcommittee, and we're very fortunate to have John sitting on that subcommittee so that he is able to convey concerns and requirements that the city of Virginia Beach has. The highlights that were contained in that document is a very narrow operational window of that use and support, only 10 years, and that's of concern to the city of Virginia Beach, because I think municipal solid waste disposal is a long-term mission that needs to be taken care of. It was insisted on by the majority of the jurisdictions that there be an exit strategy, and I know our city attorneys have spent a lot of time looking at what that exit, the criteria to exit. It's kind of hard to have a contract for a 10-year period, but you got an open door to walk out anytime during or at the end of the 10-year window. The concerns of the remaining members should be those folks that walk are still financially liable to the obligations that were created while they were a member. And so getting those terms in place, can't thank Bill McCauley enough on loan from the city attorney, helping us craft that along with the other attorneys that are reviewing this. 100% of municipal solid waste, we currently have a 95%, we're fine with that. We still have exceptions to where when John decides to take his pickup truck loaded with whatever you want to the landfill, we can accept it in our landfill and won't count against us as a percentage. And then there was a strategic operating plan draft that was also presented along with that. So what was in our letter that we sent to SIPSA and provided you a copy on Friday? First of all, it was a very heavy focus from the manager on this has got to be a long-term strategic endeavor with well thought out to provide that resource well into the future for all the member jurisdictions. That second bullet is extremely critical. The advantage that the SIPSA organization has is that they currently own, and as a member, we currently own a regional landfill that has the potential for long-term capacity. That enables us to make low-cost decisions.
So SIPSA owns that land?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And it is, of course, in the city of Suffolk. So there are some critical steps yet to take place. First of all, continue to be a good neighbor. As Mr. Dyer will attest, having a landfill in a district is extremely delicate and requires great management, great responsibility, and great attention on the part of the overseeing organization. And SIPSA has done a pretty good job in Suffolk over the period of time. The second bullet, resolve the host fee. There are several communities inside SIPSA's membership that are vehemently opposed to a host fee. And this is a little bit of retribution, in my opinion, because they have seen Suffolk not pay a tipping fee over the life of SIPSA to date. But those of us that have a landfill amounting to one other jurisdiction in the organization knows how delicate it is to have that landfill inside that jurisdiction, and that it's only reasonable to expect that to preserve that capability inside that jurisdiction, there should be an operational cost associated with assisting that city in dealing with all the issues of neighborhood, zoning, policing of their streets, smell and odor control, and the truck traffic associated with using that landfill. So the City of Virginia Beach's staff has adamantly supported that a negotiated host fee needs to be done, because those that don't have a landfill do not experience that difficulty that goes on. So that has to be resolved. And then I'm going to ask John to come up, because now we're going to get into specifics for a few minutes, because I think it's extremely important that you understand the asset of that landfill, because ultimately it will play an important part in the negotiations of finding a best value solution for disposal in the post-2018 era. So John, would you come on up?
John, welcome, my friend.
I'll put you.
Thank you, Dave. Grab the pointer real quick. As you can see, we've got the map of the SIPSA member communities, Southampton, Franklin, Isle of Wight, and Suffolk to the west of us, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Chesapeake. And you can see the regional landfill is located pretty much in the geographic center of the member communities. Here's the picture of the landfill, 46058, the Hampton Roads Airport, and the scales are just to the east, and this is 58 bypass. Important here are we've got 833 total acres on the landfill. Of those, 204 are active cells. Cell one through four are currently filled and closed, and that would be this area here. So that has been filled. Cells 5, 6, and 7 are currently active. 5 and 6 are currently built and active. Cell 7 is permitted but not constructed, and that's an important distinction. There are a couple of additional cells that are planned. These are future development, and that would be cells 8 through 10, and then 11 through 13. So there's a total of 470 acres of landfill cell area and substantial capacity available with that property. This chart's a little bit busy, but it has some very important information. As I mentioned, cells 5 and 6 are the built cells. The current capacity is 5 million cubic yards. That's the permitted airspace. The airspace is what's valuable in a landfill. That's the potential fill capacity. Based on a density of 0.835 tons, we can get an additional 4.2 tons into that amount of airspace. So that's the built capacity that we have today, and we currently are accepting somewhere in the, let's see, we've got a few more clicks here. At the bottom of the chart includes the tonnage from the past several years, and we're currently putting about 250 to 300,000 tons of waste in there per year. And so you can see by the chart over here what the anticipated lifespans would be for the landfill based on those tonnages and at those densities. And so you can see at 300,000 tons, 2028 is the fill capacity. So we currently have approximately 10 years of built capacity post 2018. So there's additional capacity that's needed. Cell 7 is permitted, but there are some issues with Cell 7 that need to be reconciled, and I'll talk about that next. So the Cell 7 conditional use permit highlights there are 7 conditions to the conditional use permit. 6 of those conditions are pretty straightforward and have already been taken care of. One of those conditions, condition 5, is a pretty significant condition. It's a very expensive condition, and there is some changes that are likely to happen with condition 5. Condition 5 is to construct 2 transfer stations in Suffolk and reconfigure the intersection of Route 58 and Bob Fuller Road, which is the entrance into the landfill, and that is to preclude left turns into the SIPSA landfill. Currently, the access to the SIPSA landfill from the east is a right turn in and a right turn out, and trucks are readily able to return back to the east. If you're traveling from the west to the landfill, access is you have to cross a lane of traffic, and it's a very dangerous situation. It's a significant concern for the city of Suffolk, and it really is a safety issue. Since the conditional use permit was established and approved, it's been recognized that condition 5 is really not in anybody's best interest. The city of Suffolk and SIPSA can both see at this point that a flyover type of entrance from the west is a really better option. But that issue has not been resolved at this point. So the conditional use permit, as it stands today, contains item 5 as you read that. But there has been significant work put into coming up with what's actually a better arrangement. But that has not been formalized. The conditional use permit has not been modified at this point. Also of importance to note on that conditional use permit is a general condition. At the bottom there it says the 2007 conditional use permit may be revoked by the City Council for failure to comply with any of these conditions. So as I pointed out in the last chart, we've got about 10 years of built capacity, but we're banking on cell 7 for capacity beyond 10 years. These are some fairly significant issues to be resolved in order for us to really take advantage of cell 7. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about the RFP process that we're going through. What I've just talked about is the built capacity that we have as a regional landfill. SIPSA has also solicited for vendors to provide disposal capacity, and that RFP was issued in the fall, October 23rd, 2014. We've had 3 respondents: Repower South, Republic Services, and Wheelabrator Portsmouth. These are very different proposals. All are being evaluated at this point, but the negotiations for that are underway. But these are all when we did the studies that Dave mentioned previously, and when we briefed you on the alternatives, we had theoretical studies, we had engineering studies, and we had possible ways that this could go. At this point, we have 3 vendors that are ready to provide services for us, and we're currently in negotiations with those vendors. The 4th option that we have, as you can see, is the regional landfill. That's our government estimate. We have a disposal method that's available to us as member communities of the SIPSA organization. So we have a baseline to work with. So we have that available to us, and that will be part of the evaluation. So the ongoing process at this point, the negotiate price, and that's for the gate rate. Each of the vendors will have a price that they're willing to accept that material, and that would be the gate rate at that facility. So once we bring it to them, that's the rate that they will charge us for that material. The second step in that is to determine the system cost, and that would be the member tipping rate. The fee that we pay to SIPSA is a system cost. It's all of the costs that are involved in moving the material. That's the transfer station, transfer, landfill, administration, all of the system cost in addition to the gate rate. So all of those things are being determined now, and so that system cost is going to be very important, particularly because the respondents are very different proposals. Each of those will have a different system cost because there are going to be different transportation costs and those types of things included in that. That will be part of the evaluation. And then we've got to select the overall best value option, and that's that will entail cost, obviously, environmental concerns, reliability, all of those types of things. And of course, we've got to obtain City Council member approvals, and we'll talk further about that. So upcoming key events, and this is where SIPSA board meetings, Bill Sorrentino and myself will be involved in these. June 24th, we anticipate, based on the schedule that Dave showed you earlier, We anticipate that we'll be ready to review the use and support comments, or at least the initial comments that were received. By the July meeting, we should be in a position to review the RFP best and final. It's possible that they could be ready by June, but if they're not ready by June, we'll certainly be ready for July. And then I anticipate by the August meeting, we'll be ready to review the final use and support agreements. Those use and support agreements will need to be reconciled. We'll need to make some modifications based on the comments that were received, but we should be at that point, at a point of having final use and support agreements, as well as the evaluation of the system cost and the best and final offers and evaluation of recommended preferred disposal option. We should be ready to discuss that at our August SIPSA meeting. So the anticipation at this point is that we'll be ready to come back to you in September to present the final draft use and support agreements or the final use and support agreement and the disposal recommendation for the 2018 SIPSA.
Very good.
At this point, I'll open it up.
Any questions or comments? This is a big deal for us, and we're glad you're all on top of it. Amelia, did you have something?
Just asking, you said there's 3 who haven't responded yet. Is there a grace period for them?
He's a board member. I guess we'll let him answer.
Should be interesting discussions in the next board meeting we have. That's certainly the expectation. I don't know that there's a hammer that we can throw down for that sort of thing, but the expectation is that we're all working together and we're moving this along. I will tell you that this is something that all of the cities in SIPSA and so forth have been working on for a really long time. It's a big deal for all of the communities. There are a lot of issues in there, and we certainly encourage them to come to the table and be part of that negotiation.
Bobby?
Yeah, as the local landfill baron for the council, I just want to, thank you all, for first of all recognizing the sensitivity, with the adjacent communities, but to also applaud you, John and everybody on the staff for the community outreach you've been doing and, trying to take care of problems, nipping them in the bud, to really be a good neighbor to everybody. Yes, it's a challenge, but I think staff has done a remarkable job in building those bridges with the community that really make it far more palatable than.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
All righty. Well, yes, ma'am.
I can ask them offline, no worries.
No, go ahead. You got 2 minutes.
So since owns everything kind of in the yellow, these properties
No
adjacent to that, are they purchasing those, or are they still in negotiation, or what's going on with those?
They are not purchasing those. That is certainly part of the discussion in terms of ensuring long-term viability of the landfill. It is possible that some of those properties may not be as needed as they once were. As the landfill cells develop, they become shields for the rest of the landfill. They itself separate from the rest of the landfill. But you can see there are other parts of the landfill that are undeveloped that also are adjacent to residential properties or vacant properties that could potentially be developed. So that is an area of concern for us, particularly for the long-term view for the landfill.
Gotcha.
What were the 3 communities that had not responded?
3 biggies: Suffolk, Norfolk, and Chesapeake.
We'll see. And we'll adjourn. Thanks for everybody. And I won't see y'all for a couple weeks.
Godspeed.